All right. Yo diggity. Okay, so this is a condensed version of the hour-long video presentation I did by the DNR expert scientist on how to prepare for wildfires. The flyers here in the video so you can see, but they claimed he was presenting the facts, predicting the future, and telling us how to prepare. If you haven't watched the full video, he basically starts off explaining that, oh, nobody ever would have thought of, fires in Western Washington. That's why we live in the rainforest, or, all of that. And then, of course, went on to blaming climate change and humans, campers, cigarette butts, barbecues, things like that. And just there's some good questions in there. Obviously, people are concerned about what they are doing to us here. And there's some really long run-on nonsensical word salad non-answers. And yeah, I'm leaving him in there because that's, I think, important. Because, like, nothing was actually even said, other than basically, you're gonna die, you're gonna burn up, we just came across this, and, so that's why we have no idea what to do or how to prepare, and, but couldn't answer one question that anyone asked him. And I don't know, is this propaganda? Is this fear-mongering? Or is he really predicting the future? If they really have no history or anything to base this on, then how did they decide that, 100-year or 200-year fire is imminent? And all of these millions of people are going to be... well, what did he say? Here's the facts. If this really does happen on the peninsula, we are all going to die because there's no way out. There's, a bridge here that, come on, even in daily traffic, and it's shutting down all the time, you're screwed. And then there's the 101. It's a one-lane road that also gets shut. One mess up, one accident, one emergency vehicle, one anything, and everyone is trapped, period, end of story. Yeah, and this expert, multiple degreed scientist, had no answers, he has multiple articles in academia, I think, one of the websites, like 26, 27, something like that, some fire expert or whatever, but I don't know, is he an actual fire expert or just a mouthpiece? Is he here to warn us so they could say, I told you so? And why is he so adamant about blaming it on people? And again, back to the question, how would they know that it's imminent when there haven't been substantial fires here in the rainforest? Oh, except they're guessing maybe in 1700. Okay, all right. Well, anyways, so I'll let you watch and decide. This is just a shorter version. Go to the link in the description for the full video, and let me know what you think. Are we doomed? Or is it just more fear-mongering?
We know the big one, the Cascadia earthquake, full rip 9.0. It's going to occur. It's inevitable, right? But we don't know when it's going to occur. It could be tomorrow, a year from now, a century or more from now. We don't know when it's going to occur, but we know it will at some point, and it's going to have a profound impact on society for years, if not decades afterwards. But I'm hoping, and I think most of us don't necessarily panic by this idea, right? We acknowledge and accept the risk of living here in the beautiful western part of our state. We plan and prepare as much as we want, and then we move on with life and our days. And just like an earthquake, we don't know when it's going to occur, but it will have a profound impact on society for years, if not decades, once it happens. But I would hope and propose we don't panic by this idea. We acknowledge and accept the risk. We plan and prepare, and we move on, like an earthquake, or a volcano, or a tsunami. I mean, we do this subconsciously already. Maybe we just need to add this to the list of these sorts of disasters and events that are going to happen that we need to plan for. So we can say for climate change, without knowing anything else, that the likelihood of fire on the west side is going to increase, right? The amount of area burned will probably increase in the future. That doesn't necessarily know or tell us, though, what the likelihood in the future holds for these larger events, right? We can talk about the overall risk. But remember, the key ingredient for those large fires are these synoptic east winds, and I'm here to tell you and disappoint you by saying we just don't know yet. And we don't know because no one until recently had thought to ask the question. And all we can say with quite a bit of confidence is there's probably going to be more fire in our future, broadly. Now, because Annette put it in the advertisement, I have to give a little nod to smoke, which is not my area of expertise, but we can just kind of go along with more fire equals more smoke. And based on the smoke we've had the last 2 years, which wasn't from West Side, it was from Eastern Washington or Canada or Oregon or California. We know regionally fire and area burn is going to increase across that region, which means that when we think about more smoke in the future, we have to think where those sources are more broadly than just our state. So again, another indicator that smoke is probably going to just become a normal part of life, which it actually was in the past. It almost feels like the last couple of decades I've been in an anomaly with the lack of smoke in some ways to me. So what do we do? This part is very forest management centric because that's all I've really had time to think about. So it totally ignores a lot of other important aspects like human health, like emergency response, right? There's a whole list of things that I am totally ignoring here, and I'm sorry, those other areas just haven't been thought of as deeply yet. So this is really more of a forest management centric list. And we won't go into too much detail, but I kind of broke it up into things you could do before a fire, during, and after a fire. And without even looking at the list of things you can consider doing before a fire, guess what? The silver lining, perhaps, is that it doesn't matter whether you're planning for a small to moderate fire or a large fire. You can pretty much do the same thing, and it would have either a positive impact, and there are a couple of instances where we're just not sure if it would make a difference for those large events. But the good news is, whether you're planning for a small to large fire, you can plan in a similar way. And I'm not going to really go through all of these. I can always send out a sheet later with all of these on them. But there are things we can do like protecting valuable infrastructure and resources using fire-wise principles, which is a practice of clearing trees around homes. There's a whole list of things you can do. There's people, extension agents at Washington State University and internally with DNR that can help you with this if it's something that's of interest to any of you. There's some basic conservation biology principles, limiting human emissions, but the one that's probably most important from a forest management perspective right now is planning and thinking about what you're going to do after the big event. Because we're all human. We all know if we don't plan for it, what are we going to do? We're going to do exactly what we did in the past. Right? We plant with the same species at the same densities, same locations, and maybe that's okay, but maybe it's not, and we should at least be deliberative about it now while we still have the time. During a fire, there aren't really many things you can do. You really have two options. You can either suppress it and contain it, or let it go and burn. And it kind of depends what values you are trying to protect or maintain. You could suppress a fire if you're more interested in maintaining a pattern or structures like old growth forest. But, you know, the basic tenet of restoration ecology is to allow natural processes like fire to occur on the landscape to try to maintain all the processes and connections across an ecosystem. So I'm not here to pass a value judgment. They both have equal value to me. But of course, there's going to be greater risk by permitting fire to occur. That's all I'm saying here. And of course, I wouldn't be a card-carrying scientist if I didn't promote using these fires as learning opportunities for research and monitoring and adaptive management. And in all honesty, I have another 70 slides I can go through right with me to talk more about fire, about old growth, and about climate change, but I don't want to bore all of you. I just want to give you an idea of some of the things we can think about, and mostly, I just want to thank you all again for your time, and I look forward to your questions and any conversations we can have now, so thanks.
In California, a big human source of fire was faulty electrical equipment or problems with electrical equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true in this part of the world as well?
I mean, a lot of our power lines are above ground in this part of the world too. I can't speak to how regularly the vegetation is cleared around them. I know that's part of their objectives for the energy companies. I can't speak to anything beyond that. So it could in theory be an issue. Whether it actually is, I don't know.
So since timber companies have monocultures of mostly Doug fir and things like that, is there any impetus to encourage them to promote diversity in these enormous tracts of land where they have trees?
I think that's a multi-part answer. So part of it depends on the management objective, right? So a lot of our private industrial lands, their management objective primarily is revenue to their stockholders, to the company. And it's probably in their interest, because they're on such short rotations and because of the economics of it, to keep those plantations as homogeneous as possible. It makes sense from an economic perspective. Now, from a climate adaptation perspective, those are some of the forests that actually have the most frequent opportunities to eventually change their management, right? Because those forests are managed on 35 to 45-year rotations, maybe on average. So they have more opportunities to change what they do in any stand than, say, the Forest Service, right, which don't really manage much and maybe thin more in some instances to promote and accelerate successional development, or late successional development. So in that sense, it's more an advantage. The economics of mixed species stands from a plantation perspective. It obviously makes it harder when you're trying to, at certain times, try to extract the wood from one species versus another. It costs a lot more. So one idea is to maybe keep stands homogeneous but diversify across stands. I'm talking, I think I'm answering part of your question or aspects of it, but I don't know if I've satisfactorily answered your question. So if I haven't, can you ask it again? Or did I?
No, that's really interesting. What if there were, say, 20-acre parcels next to one another, cedar, fir, whatever, would that decrease the likelihood of big fires?
Not necessarily for these wind-driven fires, but obviously promoting diversity can have an impact depending on what you're planting on those smaller fires. And then you also, by planting different species, they all have different regeneration strategies. So post-fire, it can give you more of a free lunch in terms of what comes back naturally on its own. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So the DNR has no control over what a large lumber company might, if they're all doing Douglas fir, you can't tell them, well, why don't you surrounded by alder and birch that might stop. You can't say that.
No, so a couple of things. It's really interesting you brought up alder because it is a natural fuel
Yes,
break,
that's what I
fire
mean.
break. Yeah, again, often for those small to moderate fires. Alder can't be planted everywhere though. It has certain site conditions, right? It has to be more of a riparian or wetter site. So we couldn't do that, and I know from your perspective, DNR is just one agency. But a lot of the stuff, or everything that influences the private timber companies and the small forest landowners, is from a forest practices side of DNR, and I don't interact with anyone from that side. Everything I do is more related to lands that DNR manages for the state and for counties and schools. So I'll do my best to answer these more forest practice related questions, but it's really outside of my sphere of knowledge generally. So just keep that in mind. Yeah.
So wouldn't it make sense for your sphere to communicate with the forest practices part of this in terms of climate change and the hotter, drier, longer conditions, all of the increase in use of desiccant materials like pesticides that are sprayed onto the clear cuts twice after a clear cut happens? I mean, it seems like a climate change policy that's comprehensive should be an urgent order of business.
So DNR is in the middle of a climate change effort. First of all, on the lands it manages, right, for the schools and counties that I was referencing before. And, you know, we have aquatics, we have habitat, we have a ton of different values. And so we're going through a process right now. We have one or two climate advisors and policy advisors working internally with individuals within DNR, as well as with an external group of university scientists to help develop a climate policy for DNR. Part of that will also look at forest practices, but forest practices may be aware of the science. They're smart people. But I don't think I don't think just being aware of the policy, they have to be very careful in what the decisions they make and how things are implemented because of all the different landowners that would be affected. I'm not a forest practices person. They'd probably give you a much better answer in defense of what they do or don't do. I can't really do that, but sure they're aware of the climate science as well, and they're part of this process that I just described.
Well, I can tell you a little bit about our experience of the last year
Sure.
with DNR and the Forest Practices Division. So they have been helping private industry get around the actual regulations in order for industry to do what it wants to do. So what I'm talking about are things like coaching Pope timber, for example, in how to avoid SEPA reviews. And we have emails between industry and DNR showing them how to subvert that process. And it's very concerning because, like you say, there are many aspects to this. There's the streams and the salmon and the orcas and the marble muralets and so forth. Not to mention the soil, right?
Sure.
And a lot of us in the community feel like we don't have people at DNR on the forest practices side who are really working for the best interest of the environment, the habitat, and the communities. And we understand that human activities contribute, right, to the situation that we're in. I worked the Eagle Creek fire. I'm a nurse and I do a lot of disaster work. I mean, I've been to everything. Earthquakes, floods, fires, OSO, all over the world. The Eagle Creek fire was the one time that I have really been afraid. When we saw the flaming pine cones dropping down around the Red Cross shelter, where there were 250 people and not enough vehicles to get them out. It's a very different kind of situation. And I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. Out here, all you have to do is walk in the woods, and it's crunchy. It's been crunchy. It's getting crunchier over the last several years. And when we had that lightning storm, that really freaky lightning storm about a week or so ago, I know it was on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah.
But the fuel is here. And we have an ignition source. But there doesn't seem to be the same priority for reducing the risk as much as we can and educating and preparing communities for how to respond. We all know what to have in our earthquake kits, right?
Right.
We know who to call.
Yep.
We know what to do. But for the fire situation, I think we're lagging behind in that. And is that something that your department can promote?
So, well, no, it's a great question. And, we presented this presentation similar to this one to the commissioner a little less than a year ago, right? Because this is all really new science. While we recognize that there's a risk of fire on the west side and that risk may increase, just the magnitude of the effect was unknown. We are looking at the west side and thinking about strategies for the west side. But again, because it's so new and so much attention has been paid rightly in a lot of ways to the east side, we're still developing those strategies and ideas, not even internally with DNR, but within the broader scientific community. I gave this talk at the Tulalip tribe. They had a West Side Fire meeting in November, and there were emergency responders there, and this was the first time they were hearing this information, and it opened up their eyes, and it made them realize that they need to start thinking about how they would respond and plan for this too. So it's not just a DNR forest thing, it's looking at a lot of our agencies and coming up with ideas of how different aspects that impact society would respond. Right? With the synoptic east winds research, one of the outcomes we hope to get is to be able to identify the conditions that tend to promote, these east winds, right? When the atmospheric pressures in certain locations, right? And with the idea being that maybe eventually, if we do find some sort of association between these broader climate signals and east winds broadly, we can come up with an early warning system, right? So to have people more prepared for that potential. So there are different aspects, but this is all really new. I know King County is thinking about this and trying to organize ideas and thoughts about this, but it's earthquake preparedness. We've had a big question over a decade probably of pushing and preparing. This is in its infancy.
This might be a silly question.
It won't be.
Something that's bothered me
Okay.
for probably a decade now, and that's that my evergreen trees, cedar and fir both, are now not a block. They are lacy, and their limbs are stretching out further, ridiculously far. Do you have?
I have to be a tree doctor too.
You should have brought in an army with you. What do you think would be the cause of that? Is that lack of?
You know, we have a pathologist and entomologist, Arnav DNR. There's some great people. I can give you the names afterwards, and they often go to small landowners and visit properties to assess and try to diagnose what's causing the problem. Sometimes they could do it over the phone with more information or with photos. But I could give you that information. I couldn't tell you that just based on what you told me.
And it's not just my property, it's all throughout the county. And a lot of the evergreens that are following the roadways are dying.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of reports of hemlock, western hemlock, as well as some cedars and big leaf maple that are starting to feel and look more stressed in some locations. A lot of people think it's climate related because well, it's been wet this year, and maybe we haven't technically had droughts every year for many, many years. It's been unusually dry for an extended period, so that over time would stress the trees. So it could be from an extended dry period as well. The trees that would manifest that are ones that are less drought tolerant, right? Like the hemlock and maybe the cedar and big leaf maple. It's not happening everywhere though, right? If you go back and look at the pollen record for the last millennia or several millennia, right, where people take sediment cores from lakes, just like you take ice cores, you dig it up and you look at the rings and the different strata in the core to look at the pollen grains that were present, you can see that we often had the same species as we do now in the past. It's just the relative abundance of those species changed as our climate was historically warmer or cooler. So, that.
Kind of. I know that a lot of us are pretty concerned with the broadcasting aerial spraying of glyphosate that's been going on in the Olympic Peninsula, which probably has a lot to do with her sick trees and probably has a lot to do with the dying and stressed trees along the roadsides as well, because they use that glyphosate along all the highways. And what is the DNR role in limiting or restricting the use of glyphosate, and even on private property, whether it's Pope Industries property or some other industrial lumber grower?
I have no idea. Again, that's all the forest practices, the regulatory arm. I have no idea what role DNR has in that. I'm sorry, it's just, again, I can think of one person in forest practices I really interacted with in the last several years. It's just not something I do. I'm sorry. If you need forest practice contacts, I can try and dig some up and email those contacts to Annette if that would be helpful to you.
Well, we have those contacts, but they're not responsive.
Okay.
So here's a question. Can you make recommendations based on your scientific expertise to the regulatory side, saying this is reality, these are things that can contribute to increased flammability?
I suppose I could inform them. I don't know how often I make recommendations, but what sort of things would I recommend in theory that would increase the flammability? What are you thinking of?
Well, I mean, obviously, things like chemical desiccants add to flammability of forest. Clear cutting, right. So maybe the practices that you've seen that are more sustainable, like selective thinning, rotation, diversification, those sorts of things that keep forests healthy and less fire susceptible.
So again, you have to remember though, these forests are almost always susceptible to a fire because they're so productive, right? But
Probably doesn't help to add chemicals though.
as far as
But the use of
proposed,
chemicals, right, has been very short in terms of the span of forest existence.
yeah, but I don't know much about this. I mean, in theory, those chemicals reduce the amount of biomass, right, in theory. And so that would, in theory, reduce the flammability if you just spray them. It's, but this is really beyond my expertise and knowledge, and I'm not feeling like I can give you a satisfying answer.
This is an important topic.
This is beyond my area of expertise. I'm the fire guy. I'm not the forest practices, regulatory, herbicide
Aren't you
spray.
saying there's gonna be big fires and there's nothing we can do about it?
Saying that big fire is inevitable. It's going to happen.
No matter what we do.
No matter what.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. We're going to have small and big fires just like we've had in the past. So I'm sure someone's scoring points with someone and I don't know who or what. Yeah.
You're a scientist, right? That's your role with the DNR?
Yes.
Could I just ask you to do all of us a favor? Because I read scientific reports like all the time.
Cool.
So just maybe go over to pubmed.gov or some other academia or research and just please look into the effects of glyphosate and their causative factors in association with fires. The fires we had on the peninsula last year were in places that were just sprayed. And I'm just begging you to please look into it. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, everyone.